Our newspaper review this morning. This is what we have on the front page of the Daily Nation. However, I'm not alone in studio. Just help me take us through some of these stories. Of course, I'm with Wangari Mwikia, public finance specialist from the EGCL Institute. Also joining me this morning is Faith Ngeve, who is the Assistant Director, Asset Recovery from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. A very good morning, ladies. Good to see you, and welcome to our studios this morning. It's quite a heavy day, actually, because, by the way, today the finance bill is going to be tabled before Parliament. There has been a huge controversial debate on that particular matter. But anyway, see, this is what we have managed to capture on the Daily Nation. Why President Ruto climbed down on new taxes. It's all about the budget. A wave of public outcry and mounting pressure from the opposition and various organizations forced President William Ruto and his Kenya Kwanza administration to cave in on the punitive proposals to the finance bill, including the 3% housing levy. But doubling of VAT on petroleum products still remains. That is on a full page on pages 4 and 5. So what are some of the concessions? To amend the bill to reduce the proposed 3% housing levy to 1.5%. There's also a reduction on the digital levy on content creators to 5% from the proposed 15%. Double VAT on petroleum products from 8% to 16%. That remains as proposed. And then the increase in rental income tax from the proposed 7.5% back to 10%. So these are some of the concessions that we have managed to get from the new amended finance bill, which is expected to be tabled in Parliament today. I don't know, Wangari, do you have anything to say about this? Well, we expect to see how that will go down in Parliament today afternoon. However, this is some of the concessions. It's been quite a huge debate in the country for the past couple of days and weeks. What do you make of, at least now they're saying, look, we've listened to Kenyans, we understand where you're coming from, and we're making these amendments because we want to accommodate your views, and you know, we wouldn't go back to saying we're going to pass this bill as is.
I think it's important, and I think it's commendable that some of the concessions were made. Yeah. But I think there's still some structurally unsound, parts of the bill. Even thinking about the housing levy, even though it has been reduced, the question still remains. How is it going to be operated? What about the people who want to opt out? Should we make it voluntary or not? Right. So I think it's good that there were some concessions, but I think there's still some structural challenges that
needs to be addressed. Yeah. All right. Well, also joining us this morning as well, right here in studio, Diana Gishengo. A very good morning to you, National Coordinator, that's TISA Kenya, the Institute for Social Accountability. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Zainab. Good
indeed,
morning.
Indeed. And before I get to you, let me hear from Faith. I don't know what you make of at least some of the new developments that we're witnessing from this finance bill. Do you think this is a good move?
Okay, thank you, Zainab, and good morning, viewers. I think it's good that Kenyans' voices were listened to by the authors of the bill, and that they've considered some of the issues that are affecting Kenyans. And rather, I would have wished if more was to be done to reduce the burden on Kenyans. As we know, Kenyans are going through a very hard economic time. Right. Yes.
So, but, Wangari talked about structural issues that still need to be addressed. Diana, what do you make of this? This has been quite a heavy topic for Kenyans.
Thank you, and I think it remains very, very heavy. Good to see that at least it's here. The title is public outcry, but I would say public voice has been partially listened to, but not entirely heard. One, I think the amendment to the housing levy from 3% and to 1.5% is a clear indication. They are not listening, because the problem is not how much you pay. Even by reducing it, you make it more impractical, because if people are accumulating the money to get a house within 50 years, it means by contributing 1.5%, we are making it more unrealistic. Right. And it actually goes to show how untenable the housing levy is. The digital content there, clearly they are listening and very, very interesting. It is truly sad that the Parliament and the executive, the consensus is still that petroleum product need to get to 16%.
That's a double from 8%.
From 8%.
Right.
And I think that right there is the heart of the finance bill this year. Because ultimately it doesn't matter what concessions have been made, it means the price of commodities, of services, transport, everything will go significantly up. And people have reduced incomes, most companies are shutting down. There is a clear economic depression in this country. So to increase this one, there will be increase in collection, but there will also be a significant decrease in consumption. So that is one of the things where we hope the people's representative will exercise the people's will as per Article 94 and address that. Then definitely the rental income, there I have no comment. The turnover tax has not been addressed either. So all small businesses will also be paying increased tax. So it's a conversation that I hope won't die today, but instead people will continue speaking to their MPs and the MPs will exercise their legislative and oversight role
mandate in Parliament. All right, so the second reading, of course, will be happening today when that report is tabled in Parliament. All right, so just adjacent to that report, still on the Daily Nation, police split over Koome promotions. That's a controversial promotion of over 500 senior police officers by Inspector General of Police Japhet Koome last week, which has split the service down in the middle, with insiders now linking the stalemate to political alignments within and outside the service. Last Monday, Koome announced through a memo that he had promoted 514 senior officers, but the move was declared illegal and unprocedural by the National Police Service Commission, which said that the the positions were not advertised beforehand. You can get that full report on page 12 of the Daily Nation. What else do we have? How smart police work led to abductors' arrest. This was about 2 kidnappers who police believed are part of a wider criminal network who aided their own capture on Saturday when they began random negotiations with the family of a media personality after abducting her daughter along with her friend. The kidnappers had initially demanded 1 million for the release of the captives, but reduced it to 500,000, with each paying 250,000. Then you have a detective who was part of the team that tracked them down, and he gives an account of exactly what really happened. You can get that full report by Simon Shuri on the second page of the Daily Nation. And what else do we have? A group sues farm over toxic baby powder. And this is something not just mothers but parents would be interested to listen to. It's a story about a rights group which has sued American multinational Johnson & Johnson over the sale of a talc-based baby powder to Kenyans. The African Center for Corrective and Preventive Action says that though the product has been banned in some countries like the European Union and in India, it is still available for sale in Kenya. Well, that petition concerns protection of consumer rights. The group, through its executive director James Mwangi, alleged that Johnson & Johnson service uses what they call as benzene and talc in their baby powder product, and that it claims that benzene and talc actually causes cancer in humans, and that it is contaminated by a certain product, a carcinogenic substance, causing exceedingly harm to its users. So this is what is happening right now. It's a class action, and they're inviting other complainants to join in the same. The petitioners want the court to allow to turn the case actually into a class action. It's still a petition at this particular point. All right, let's see what else we have. And this is a continuation of what was on the first page of Daily Nation inside Ruto's concessions on the disputed finance bill and what members of parliament agreed to change in that particular bid. Committee members telling Nation they have the president's blessing to make those particular changes they did make. You can get that report as well. Pay slips to suffer as state raids workers. That's salaried workers' take-home pay is set to fall further as President William Ruto's administration continues to push for higher deductions for savings, housing and health insurance amid the ever-rising cost of living. The state will on Thursday unveil the 2023-2024 budget, which it has coupled with a raft of revenue-raising measures that promise to further weaken the bargaining power of salaries already eroded by inflation. Government officials, including President Ruto and his deputy Rigathi Gachagua, are pushing to pass all the proposals contained in the finance bill despite the outcry as they seek to raise more tax revenue and reduce borrowing. In fact, in February, the state increased the mandatory retirement deduction from a flat rate of 200 shillings to a maximum of 1,080, with further increases planned in the future in line with the National Security Fund Act 2013. So you already have workers grappling with high prices of commodities, and you have this new move within the budget to increase revenue for the government. What does that mean for people who are salaried? You can get that report as well. Meanwhile, in politics, Gachagua told off over Mudavadi attack. As Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua's derision of Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi's foreign trips, which has lifted the lead on the tension between the two. Yesterday, a section of Kenya Kwanza politicians from Western Kenya came to Mudavadi's defense after Gachagua implied that the Prime Cabinet Secretary's foreign trips were not adding value to Kenyans. Gachagua was reacting to reports that Mudavadi has been tapped by President William Ruto to his ambassador at large, owing to his overseas trip to represent the head of state. Last week on Friday, the DP in an interview said, and I quote, "Let me tell you, the only foreign trip I will attend is that which will bring development because I don't have interest to attend swearing-in ceremonies." He says, "I've told the president to let me address this issue of alcohol and bang among our youth. I know after they are reformed, they will be able to get jobs. This is a major role and it's better than traveling abroad more than 20 times. So that was a jab, a perceived jab on the cabinet, that's the Prime Cabinet Secretary Musalia Mudavadi, and this is something that we'll continue to keep an eye on as it happens. All right, so what else do we have? Very quickly as we wind up on the Daily Nation, state wants Shakahola victims moved to prison and force-fed. Well, the state wants those rescued from Shakahola forest moved from a rescue center to Shimo-la-Tewa maximum prison, where they will be forced to eat. Now, this comes after it emerged that 65 victims rescued from the forest are actually starving themselves. After they were rescued, they were taken for treatment before being transferred to that Sajahanadi Rescue Center in Kilifi for counseling and recovery. However, investigators discovered that the victims have boycotted food and are demanding to be released. Wangari, I don't know if you followed on what has happened and what has been happening from the Shakahola, massacre story, but it's quite bizarre where you have people who have been rescued from this, but still harbor the same kind of mentality of we're doing this thing because it's something we believe in, it's within our faith, and they're starving themselves. So you have the government saying, look, you know what, we're going to force feed you now because we can't have you die and you have to be charged in a court of law. I don't know what you make of this.
I mean, it just speaks, number one, to the level of desperation of people now. I think people largely start turning to cults or extremist groups as such, because they don't feel like they have somewhere to turn to. And I think sometimes it's also related to the economy. Right. People are also looking for ways out. People are looking for reprieve of a certain kind. And I think once they latch onto something, they find some reprieve from a different perspective. So I think it is quite it speaks to the challenging times, but it also speaks to you know, the level of you know, the level of brainwashing that some of these cults have and have a hold on people. So it's really a very sad story.
It is a sad story.
I hope that they're able to be rescued. I hope that they're able to be rehabilitated. But I do hope, you know, something can be done about this, especially the regulation of religious institutions. I think there is some space, at least for the government or other body, to really look into what is happening with some of these religious institutions, and are they actually taking advantage of their congregants, or are they supporting them in different ways? It can be difficult, and also I think I do think there is a space for government intervention here, or regulation.
Right, and I think we've seen what the government is doing. Faith, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, because it's quite bizarre. I mean, this is a story that we hoped would turn out differently. It didn't turn out differently. That rescue you know, mission is still continuing, and also more bodies are being discovered in Shakahola Forest. It's unfortunate that those who were rescued you know, still harbor the same feelings that, you know, we believe in what we believe in, and there's nothing you can do about it. What do you make of it from a human standpoint?
Okay, it's a very sad state of affairs. Yeah. Actually, the whole event of Shakahola shocked the nation. Right. Because no one would have thought that such brainwashing is going on within our religious institutions. And as we know, Zainab, Kenyans and actually globally, people are grappling with mental health. Right. I know attempted death by suicide is an offense under the Penal Code, and that is why they are being charged. However, if the government could look into the root cause of why these people are still continuing to believe that they ought to die, then they may address the symptoms. They may be able to get into the minds of these people who've been rescued, and at least find out what really happened, what extent of brainwashing is there, and also now extend their maybe research or inquiry into other areas or other religious institutions, because you never know what else is going on. It is a shock that for the last over 5 years, as the media tells us, this has been going on. So I think these people have lost hope. They have nothing to go back to. Their alleged leader is also in. So the mission should be to show these people there is hope. There's something ahead. There is a future once you're rescued. So if we can approach it from that angle, other than from a criminal angle, I think it can work better. Yeah.
And I sort of agree with you. I don't know, Diana, what you make of an approach to sort of addressing not just the symptom, but actually trying to understand where they're coming from. Because if you continue to hold on to this belief, that you must be coming from somewhere that is quite deep.
That's very true, because any form of extremism or fundamentalism is not about ignorance or the intolerance. It's the power that is being wielded on these people. And we do not know yet what is driving people in Shakahola to be okay, to die. That would be something that I hope one, our intelligence bodies and our medics, mental health medics as well, could guide us in knowing what exactly is leading people to this extremism. But what is tragic is that the adults who've been rescued from Shakahola are also carrying with them the children. So one, I hope at this point we will see a rescue of the children and them being removed from that particular environment completely. Clearly, their parents and guardians are no longer, in my opinion, capable of taking care of them. So the state needs to take that over and even remove them from the coast, and hopefully we can work on the extremism and rescue the children first, then get to the adults. What is also interesting is Shakahola is a massacre, but it is also religious extremism.
Right.
We've had Islamic extremism as well that has been studied and so on. Are there similarities? Are we addressing this very, very differently from how we address
issues of extremism and radicalization?
Exactly, because this is a form of radicalization. And if at all, the numbers are now at 300.
I believe so, yes.
The discovered ones, and there are still graves that have not been excavated as yet. There are also questions of, are there double standards when it comes to extremism of one, based on one quote-unquote religious beliefs? So there are questions around that would be interesting to address. What is also interesting is what will happen, what are these skills that are there in Shibolautewa, where we are sure now they will eat?
Well, that's actually a very interesting question. Well, we don't know what will happen when they're taken away from the rescue center to Shibolautewa, but what the state says is they must eat. They're not going to starve. All right. So anyway, we'll just wind up on the Daily Nation, and we have to take a break. But let me close this pop-up here on our paper and move forward to see what else we have here before we move on. Just an important story here because it was something that had happened here in the country. Arshad's murder was planned in Pakistan. His mother claims, that's the mother of the slain Pakistani journalist Arshad Sharif, was claimed that the plan to assassinate her son was actually hatched in her home country and executed in Kenya. Rifat Ara has filed an application at the Pakistani Supreme Court seeking an independent and transparent investigation into the death of her son. She's also named a number of people she wants investigated over the shooting in Tinga area. That's along Magadi Road in Kajiado County. Sharif was actually shot dead in October last year by officers attached allegedly to the General Service Unit in what the National Police Service said was a case of mistaken identity. Also, why did DPP Haji wants case against ex-PS Omolo thrown out? That's the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nuruddin Haji, was applied to withdraw charges against former Permanent Secretary Lilian Omolo of alleged loss of 468 million at the National Youth Service. In this application, filed before the Anti-Corruption Court in Milimani, the DPP applied to withdraw the abuse of office and conspiracy to commit a felony charges, among others, against the former PS for Public Service and Youth Affairs. So why? You can get that full report, and we'll also just maybe touch on it a little bit when we come back. Business Daily, this is what we have on the front page. Costly power generators make big comeback on long drought. That's share in power. Mix highest in nearly 5 years. Increased supply from thermal plants translates to high bills. Also, value of halted cases hit 10 billion as Haji seeks to end ex-PS trial. So that's one issue. J&J faces class action suit in Kenya over talc baby powder. And also, Treasury faces renewed rate pressure in June bond sale. And lastly, the 187.7 billion debt unnerves investors in the KQ equity stake sale. What do we have on Taifa Leo? This is what we get on Taifa Leo on the front page. Ushuru, Ruto, Asalimu, Amri. And it goes on to speak about what we did see on the front page of the Daily Nation. Baadhi ya vipengele vitakavyo rekebisho. And it goes on to talk about some of the concessions from the finance bill. And finally, on the East African, it was our same publication between the 10th of June to the 16th of June. Grain drain. Food fights are back from Namanga to Nimule. Maize exports are stuck at the border points as EAC partners erect new barriers to food trade, defeating the common market principles. You can get that full report inside our East African publication. food diversion scandal also bites staff at the World Food Program. And also Kagame gives marching orders to top army men. The Rwandan leader saying the move is meant to instill discipline, service and hard work in its troops. All right, so winding up on that paper, time to just take a very quick break here on AM Live. When we come back, we'll get into our conversation this morning. Stay with us. The hashtag, as always, is AM Live NTV at NTV Kenya at Zainab Ismail.
Good morning, rise and shine. Thank you for being with us dark and early on the Morning Fix. My name is David Ayuke.
And I'm Mariam Bishar. This is where good music lives, and guaranteed your weekday mornings are never going to be the same again.
Yes!
Wake up to the sound of David and Mariam on Nation FM.
Every single day.
They're your morning hosts with the most, bringing you the energy you need to start your day. Nation FM, where good music lives.
Let me see y'all
Dance.
Bluebird peanut butter, made with 100% pure peanuts and a good source of omega-6. Grow healthy and happy kids with Bluebird peanut butter. Available in 200 grams, 400 grams, and 800 grams. Buy a pack today.
We came to ball. Let's get straight to it. Ready for whatever. We gon' ride. Line them up. Let's go toe to toe. Tell them pick a side. Put in work. We don't play no games. Watch him running high. Savage mode. We gon' keep it G. Yeah, you know the vibe. When it's meal time, who gon' tell my dogs we can't eat? Oh yeah. Yeah. I'm a threat.
Get the Ballin' Twister box for only $7.50. NBA, KFC, balling all day.
Ready to showcase your football talent? The wait is over. Safaricom Chapa Dimba is back. Bigger, bolder, and better. Safaricom is on the hunt for the next big footballing sensation. Register your team. Visit chapadimba.safaricom.co.ke and you too can be the next football star. Cheza kama wewe.
All right, welcome back to the program. You are watching AM Live on NTV. Time to get into our conversation this morning. And just to remind you, in studio with me this morning is Diana Gishengo, the National Coordinator, TISA Kenya. Wangari Muike is the Public Finance Specialist at EGCL Institute, as well as Faith Ngede, who's the Assistant Director, Asset Recovery from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. It is all about transparency and accountability. And just to look at a very quick report here on the Business Daily, I touched on it a little bit before we went on a break. It talks about the value of halted cases hitting 10 billion as Haji seeks to end XPS trial. It says that the Director of Public Prosecutions, Nurdin Haji, has applied to withdraw corruption charges against the former Principal Secretary Lilian Omolo, adding to the growing list of graft cases with a cumulative value of more than 10 billion, which have, by the way, collapsed so far. We will get to that in a moment, but let me begin with you, Diana. When you're talking about accountability, transparency in public institutions and holders of those public institutions, do we really understand what it means when we say we need to hold these individuals to account and we need to have transparent public institutions?
Do we really? I think, yes, when it comes to accountability and transparency in these processes, it's one of the areas that we are yet to get to the required thresholds, because it's truly unfortunate and that every time we think or we get government institutions making statements to us that finally here we have investigated, we are now very accountable, we are going for so and so. Let me just use the case of the former PS, Lillian, and think about how her prosecution was undertaken, both in the public. I think she applied several times. She was in hospital. There were reports of how her living status had deteriorated. She came back, and now her case has been withdrawn. At that point, you would have formed an opinion that our investigative and prosecutorial institutions have finally done a very thorough job and are going for somebody with accounting responsibility. We are not very badly off as an institution when it comes to ensuring that there are mechanisms for us to do investigation around graft. Whether it is DCI, EACC is here, they are very, very well skilled in doing this investigation. So by the time they decide to charge, we on the other side, all we can do is believe finally there is accountability, okay? We question sometimes the investigation when it looks targeted around issues of transparency. And this is a process where even the Public Procurement and Regulatory Authority would give us details. How did the procurement happen? We have attempted to centralize all our procurement. It ought to be public. So when that is not followed procedurally, there's a problem, okay? And that is where the cases of transparency and accountability come in. But every time, all we are treated to is a public relations game.
Right.
Both in the past and even the cases we've seen in this particular regime.
Right.
It is never clear. Political expediency seems to take precedence over transparency, accountability, and access to justice. And for economic matters, it is so grave that I wish more effort than the effort we see being put on non-issues like who do we love, things like that. We should focus on anti-corruption. It's the reason why Kenyans are in this pain that they are currently. But transparency, accountability, it's for this show, Zainab. It's largely for this show. But let me not negate it completely, because I am aware of officers in our institutions who dedicate their time. And this is a category of officers we must seek to reinforce and ensure that their morale is up. From DCI, ODPP, EACC, PPRA. PPRA is always telling Parliament, please help us reinforce this. We'll be able to track even grants and debts that are procurement-related grants. But government institutions have declined to take up that. So these people become so demotivated because they have more clarity around the implications of the lack of transparency and accountability. How many DCI officials right now are in depression because they investigated cases that they believed they had gathered all the required evidence, and they know for themselves that these people stole from the public. They do not have the prosecutorial power or the judicial powers. That is withdrawn. You know, when you clean a house and somebody comes and says it is not clean, the humiliation, that is what those people are going through. They will become very, very demoralized, and then all of a sudden our public institutions will no longer have the willpower to even do the right thing. What culture is that? So it is at different levels. The political leadership is failing us, but there must be ways of encouraging the technical people to continue doing the right thing.
Right. And I mean, we have Faith here, who is represents the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Corruption has been a disease that just never goes away. We keep getting hit by scandals, administration after administration, and we sort of got used to these scandals, and they're mega huge scandals. I mean, institutionalized scandals. Just talk to us. I mean, tell us, where then do you think the problem lies?
Thank you, Zainab. and to continue from my colleagues' remarks, actually state and public officers is a trust bestowed upon those officers by Kenyan public. So they are actually supposed to safeguard the public funds, put in internal controls to protect the public funds, and account for those public funds. They actually have a fiduciary duty to all Kenyans to ensure that the funds as allocated are used for the purpose that is intended. On the issue of graft, yes, graft has been with us for as long as
you can remember.
I can remember, and others who came before me can remember. The question is, why haven't we been able to slay this dragon of graft, knowing the effects that it has on Kenyans? One, I will say there is a glorification of corruption. And that comes in when it comes to our electing our leaders. We know our leaders are the ones who go in there. For instance, our MPs are the ones who legislate. Either strengthen the laws to fight corruption or weaken the laws to fight corruption. They either put in the right mechanism, build capacity for the institutions that are supposed to fight graft, just as she said, and also ensure that the processes are carried on and hold now the institutions to account. So when Kenyans put leaders whom they very well know are implicated in graft, either they have cases in court, they may not have cases in court, but they realize that when this person was elected, the last election, he only owned a bicycle. But right now, as he's coming to campaign for the second term, he has a fleet of vehicles. He has constructed buildings in the local town, multi-story buildings. He has so he has amassed so much wealth.
Accumulated wealth over such a short period of time.
So much wealth.
Right.
They don't ask themselves, where did this person or this leader get the money from? And also interrogate themselves, introspect and say, this is actually our money, and then we should not put this person in office again.
So
unfortunately,
do you think it's a mindset, it's a culture thing? Because look, so you have petty, petty corruption, let me call it petty corruption. Kitu kidogo, mheshimiwa, kitu kidogo, or even in public institutions, wacha nikupatie kitu kidogo, you get services, be able to maybe harakisha my passport to be, to be processed. Then you have this mega scandals, which include procurement scandals and all these things. So is it culture? Is it entrenched in us as a society?
I'll say yes, we have developed that culture of corruption. And Zainab, what you may term as petty corruption may not be as petty as we want to look at it. For instance, let's take a case of traffic police officers. How many are on the roads right now? Maybe 1,000 or 2,000. Each one of them is collecting 100 shillings from the matatus, or 50. Do your maths. Along how many matatus operate in the country, if you look at the statistics. So at the end of the day, you find it is millions of shillings that have come from the pockets of Wanjiko that have gone into the hands of those rogue police officers. Actually, you find, if you are to look at it cumulatively, what we term as petty corruption, which happens at immigration, or what happens at the Ministry of Lands, what happens at maybe the registration of persons, the 100, 500, even compared to what we now see as mega corruption, is a lot of money. And where it hurts most is that as Wanjiko, as I'm giving that 50 bob or that 100 bob, my child somewhere may not even have milk.
Right.
So corruption actually boils down to touch the basic issues at the level where Mwananchi is, is operating.
Right.
So we need to focus on the leaders that we choose. However, there are two angles with dealing with corruption. There's a criminal angle, and also there is a civil angle. You just talked about the issue of cases in court. Those are criminal cases. However, there is the civil aspect, where as EACC, we look at the wealth of this public officer or state officer who came to the office 10, 5 or so years ago, or who was appointed as a parastatal chief or in any of these positions, or who's been a KRA officer and at the border or Mombasa. And then we look at how much have they accumulated. Is it commensurate to their known legitimate sources of income? And then when we go after them, we ask, okay, this is what you earn. For the last 5 years, when we've done our investigations, this is what you ought to own, but this is what you own. Tell us, how did you acquire that wealth?
Do you get answers?
They try to explain, but if it's you cannot explain, if the officer cannot explain, then it is forfeited to the state. And that is the approach that EACC is now taking.
You can forfeit the assets, but then at the end of it all, that person has to be held accountable for that.
Yes, that does not bar them, does not remove them from criminal culpability.
Right. So that's when you push for now pressing of charges?
We push for prosecution through the office of the DPP.
All right.
So if I may give, it is not all doom when it comes to the fight against corruption.
And we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that, and you can give us an idea of, some of the things that at least we can be hopeful for. But Wangari, from an economic standpoint, we're told it's not very good. I mean, when we're looking at this report, the DPP's cases that have been withdrawn so far, that growing list of graft cases with a cumulative value of more than 10 billion, which have collapsed so far, that's not little money for our struggling economy. What does that mean for us in terms of this poor public finance management on the economy of our country when we're talking about issues of accountability and especially corruption?
I mean, there's so many things to unpack here, Zainab. I mean, even just reacting to what my colleagues here have said, the first thing I always consider when I think about corruption in the country, and I think Transparency International last year ranked Kenya, I think our score was 32 out of 100, where 0 is very highly corrupt and 100 is very clean, and we scored 32, which is quite a dismal score. And I think we're 123rd out of almost 180 countries, which shows that based on perceptions, because corruption is also a very notoriously difficult thing to measure because of its hidden nature, right? But when I think about even institutions like the EACC, even having the EACC in and of itself in the country signals that the country is really in challenges when it comes to corruption. And it speaks about, it points to what you were talking about earlier, Faith and Zainab, about the culture of corruption. If you're in an institution or in a country or in a setting where corruption, small corruption, medium, large, is a norm, then it becomes okay. It's kind of permissive for people to take small and large bribes. It just becomes a part of the culture. And I think about Ms. Omolo, Lillian PS, ex-youth PS Lillian Mbogo Omolo. I believe she worked before at one of the big multilateral agencies. It was a UN or one of those big multilateral agencies. And those agencies, if you work there for a long time, you're really infused with a culture of non-corruption, good governance, and those things. So it becomes very surprising when someone comes from a strong backbone institution like that and comes into government, and the next minute they're being accused of this big graft cases. So for me, it really it points to culture and saying what environment are you working with, and what does that environment allow you to do. So The other thing, when I think about corruption, you know, before devolution, corruption used to have big major scandals at the central level. Someone was telling me this the other day, where he's saying, no, when you devolve, now also corruption has been devolved, right? So you're seeing it at the national level, you're seeing it at the county level, at the sub-county level, and it continues at the private sector level. So it's almost diversified opportunities for corruption now have been created. Someone facetiously was saying, you know, at least you're spreading money. It's not really at the top, you're spreading it more broadly.
Which is quite unfortunate.
Which is quite unfortunate. But then it also does speak to that culture of corruption. Now we are kind of infecting the nation with this idea that public resources, public money can be used for private use. And I think this is quite a challenge. But you know, even when you think about the laws that we have in place, and everybody says, you know, Kenya is a place that has very strong laws, but the problem is enforcement, right? So if you have a very good legal framework that dictates what the punishments are for corruption, but we are unable to effect them or to implement those punitive measures, then we start to have a challenge there, right? Why is it that, and I'm not, Faith, I'm not disparaging the existence of the EACC, but when you have to form an institution like the EACC, it says that the system is unable, like the legal system, the courts are unable to effectively just implement the law as outlined when it comes to corruption. And I think that's a big signal that when we form an institution like the EACC, that the nation itself is finding it very difficult to prosecute these cases. But at the end of the day, you know, corruption is seen as a tax. Essentially, it's a tax, right? So if I'm coming here as an investor and I'm coming to spend money in the country, I then have to factor in, you know, fees for corruption at various stages. And corruption can also be very distortionary because you don't know. People are very unpredictable, right? So someone can demand a certain fee at the beginning of a project.
We've seen investors actually shun away from starting their businesses and investing in this country.
Yes, exactly.
Because of corruption.
I mean, if you look at the Corruption Perception Index already, people don't want to come and invest here because you say, you know, it's a black box. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't want to be paying a fee at the beginning of a project, in the middle of a project, and at the end of a project because, you know, you are unable to manage the people who are you know, providing bribes. But at the end of the day, of course, you know, if you don't have good investment, it lowers economic growth because, like you said, the investors don't want to invest here. People who are investing don't want to invest large sums of money, and they divert their resources to other countries or other jurisdictions. So it really is a big challenge.
So it hurts the economy as a whole. And Diana, I mean, Wangari mentioned the issue of decentralizing corruption. So we did have the national government and then there's endemic corruption. Then we devolved into county governments, and with county governments came its own challenges, and there have been many cases of graft. We've seen governors being charged before the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission for they've been there for investigations, and many other cases of you know, scandals within you know, the county governments. Then what do you think the issue is when it comes to the institutions that we have? It's the structure. Now we'll go back to the issue of the culture, because we're not mentioning it's a culture issue, right?
Yes. Corruption is a culture issue. It has become a way of business. It is a way of livelihood. And it is so deeply entrenched. Wangari speaks about investors and how they have to plan for corruption. Political aspirants must plan for corruption from the get-go. And the voters allow and enable it by ensuring that every time two pesa macho, that is where it always starts. We never scrutinize government or elected aspirants and candidates, what they are promising. Most of the time, people with significant resources just end up winning the ballot. There have been a few.
So it depends. If your pockets are heavy,
then
the better chances you have of actually clinching, you know, office.
Yes, and if you recall the surveys and research that has been done on the cost of politics in Kenya, if you think about the amount of money an MCA needs, why would they require 30 to 50 million for a campaign? what is it for that small ward, and calculate their salaries, they will never recoup the money. Presidential campaigns is usually like $500 billion. Their salary will never get to that, yet they are able to pump that amount of money into the campaign. They must get it back somehow. I have observed politicians when they travel home, and they must go with loose notes, 250 bobs, 100. Why? Because whenever voters see an elected leader, they are not telling them the finance bill is problematic. Do your work. As mheshimiwa umetuletea nini? And that becomes such a deep-rooted culture. They must keep looking for money to give this their electorate and constituents, and they are lauded.
Do you think there's a gap, a delinking between holders of public office now, for example, just for this instance, elected leaders and the people they represent? Because is there a structure, a way we can hold our elected leaders accountable for the period they have been in office? Now, when you go back to seek a fresh mandate, do citizens have that awareness, the knowledge to ask, we sent you to, you know, Parliament, we sent you to the Senate, we gave you a governor's position for 5 years, what have you done? Do we have such kind of a structure, or do we, as, you know, Kenyans, you know, lack that essence of, you know, knowledge on how to do this particular accountability process for our elected leaders?
To be honest, I think there lacks a formal way of evaluating the performance of elected leaders. But in a sense, Kenyans really do understand that these ones have delivered, these ones have not delivered. That is why we see a very high turnover of elected officials. Most of the time, particularly for MCAs and MPs, the turnover is way above 70%. The retention, the people who are retained in any elections. But what do they look for? Most of the time, they look for development, quote unquote, development. Who was able to build a bridge, but that's not the role of MPs and MCAs. It is representation, oversight, and legislation. I don't recall in a campaign where you saw voters analyze an MP on the basis of how well they raised questions about the state of play in a constituency. So I think there is a total disconnect, and instead what we see is members of parliament who are voted is how they managed CDF, which there's always a tug of war. Are they in charge? Are they not? But during the campaign period, all billboards are, I built this school, I refurbished this. That is why you're even seeing them putting their images on books, on textbooks, so that this child's parent knows, I am the one who built this. So that is a very huge disconnect. But I think we are growing. In the last election, and led by the media, there was a shift where we even tried to interrogate the campaign promises of the executive, the presidency and gubernatorial position. Can we keep up this? Because, for instance, the State of the Nation address, when the president comes in November to submit a report, they ought to give us performance reports. And I think it is time we as citizens, as people who are not elected, start evaluating and giving them a public score. That way we refocus them on their mandate, and we stop allowing them to lead us in the distraction that takes us away from accountability, from transparency, and deeper into corruption. So it is something, it is a culture and education that we must undertake to do with all position. And in that same breath, we must also hold to account state officers and public officers. We should get to a level where the president in the next reshuffle knows which cabinet secretary must be laid off, what we are looking for in a certain ministry, but we don't do that. What you will see instead is either who's been able to benefit their tribe the most, and then you will see ethnic contestation mtu wetu ndio hayuko kwa serikali, instead of us saying this person has served the country very, very well in line with the requirements of a state and public officer, in line with Article 10. Can we get to that? I think if we collaborate very well, see what the media has done in partnership with the people around the finance bill. If we focus on performance and accountability, we can change the culture.
We have a whole chapter on integrity and leadership in our constitution, and that has been a major thing, and especially we used to go back to it, especially during the election and the campaign time. Do you think that's just another chapter, or do we actually uphold that chapter to its true essence and meaning?
Zainab, this is one of the chapter that was put as a doormat. Now it's about to be discarded to the dustbin. And I think we've tried to push very, very much in the past. I have indicated previously that, one, we lost it the minute you have different standards for elected officials, you cannot come and apply different standards for appointment. So the minute we cleared people with integrity issues in the 2013 election, including crimes against humanity, then after that, anybody who had attempted rape, even anybody who may have led a Shakahola event, will be cleared through the ballot the minute they are elected. What ground or standing will they have to tell somebody, look, I think you're suspected of having defrauded a cooperative of certain money, you're not suitable for office? So this is a chapter that has been mutilated both between IEBC, ODPP, EACC. They must come together and we define guidelines for clearing elected officials that meet the ethical requirements, ethical, not criminal, ethical requirements of Chapter 6.
Okay.
And they abide by those. I hope our judiciary will come back and restore our Chapter 6, because the first instance, the first decisions that were made around this were by the judiciary, and they lowered the standards. In the 2022 election, we saw some changes, but they are not for ethical leadership. It is that you have been convicted by any judicial mechanism. So if you've been impeached, you have appealed and you cannot appeal anymore, then you are deemed not suitable for office. But the standards of Chapter 6 are not beyond reasonable doubt. No. It is that you're not providing dignity to that office. Okay? Anything that makes us doubt your ethics, your suitability for office, that there are questions around your character, you should not be in office. Go and work on your image, clear everything, then come back. Do not be elected into office and use our resources to clear your name. Until we heal that particular problem, Chapter 6 will continue being something that we refer in the archives, or, you know, it feels like it is in the, it is something that our ancestors had.
but it is there. I mean, let me hear from Faith. I mean, it's a whole chapter that is supposed to guide our leaders, you know, not just leaders, but, you know, should be able to guide us as Kenyans in terms of how we move forward. But has it been able to live up to its standard?
Oh, well, Zainab, to continue from where Dana left it, it has not yet. Reason being, Chapter 6 is about leadership and integrity. It's about who is that person holding public office. And as we said, public office is a public trust bestowed upon that leader by the Kenyan people to serve them, not to lord over them. Basically, that is, in a nutshell, that is what Chapter 6 is. Is a public trust. So you are there to serve and not to be served as a leader. Now, Chapter 6 was codified under the Leadership and Integrity Act.
Okay.
Leadership and Integrity Act 2012 is an act that was passed by Parliament in 2012. And it was intended to give teeth or to give effect to Chapter 6 of the Constitution. However, when the bill on leadership and integrity was presented in Parliament, it was shredded, mutilated, and actually watered down to an extent that actually makes it sort of an amorphous piece of legislation, such that the offenses that were to be created to enforce Chapter 6 under now that statute were all swept out. Zainab, if you look at what was proposed as a bill and what came out
as an act,
it's
completely
totally different documents, totally different. And why? Because under that law, that is where we'll have, gotten a grip on the leaders that we elect. That is where there will be offenses on misuse of public funds, abuse of office, anything to do with integrity and ethics for a public officer. Actually, it was intended that all leaders, state and public officers, should be beyond reproach, like the Caesar's wife. Because if you're leading Kenyans, you ought to be a role model. Carry your business, private and public, in a way that brings dignity to the office that you hold. Because it's not your office, it's Kenyan office, it's office belonging to Kenyans. So when that piece of legislation was mutilated, it actually negated everything that Chapter 6 intended to achieve. And that is where we still go back to what kind of leaders do we elect into office? Are they the leaders who observe the constitutionalism, our constitution, who uphold the values and principles set out in our constitution, principles and values of governance under Article 10? Are they those kind of leaders? So,
we've had cases of, like, for example, in some other areas where if a leader is implicated, in a corruption scandal, in abuse of office, charges, or anything even near that, what do? In some instances, you'd find they would step aside and say, what, I'm stepping aside, let the course of the law take its effect, let's see, and if I am, cleared, I will go back to my office. But that has never actually happened in Kenya.
It is unfortunate because we see other jurisdictions, including little things as holding a party during COVID. A whole prime minister goes home. Not even about misuse of public funds. Having a party when you are telling the citizenry.
Integrity, the question of integrity.
It's about integrity. It's about how do we hold our leaders? What kind of leaders do we have in office? And as you correctly say, none has ever stepped down.
So it goes back to that, to us as individuals, because we have key legislation in place. We have a framework. We understand what the Constitution says, but we can't, legislate our own, the way we are as a people. That would be difficult to do. So it goes back to our morals and ethics as well. As Kenyans. That's essentially what you're saying.
It's about values and principles. Morals. The basic little thing that we teach our children as they grow up. Do not steal, be honest, do not abuse others, do not do this, and the basic ones. That is actually what our leaders should go back to. And with that, they'll be able now to be good role models to Kenyans. They'll be able to protect public finances. They'll be able to ensure that the nation moves forward, there's development, there's growth.
All right.
And they'll have at the back of their minds that I'm here to serve Wanjiku and not Wanjiku to serve me through their taxes.
All right.
Yes.
And we're going to get back to you in just a moment, but we have to take a very short commercial break here on AM Live. So stay with us. The hashtag we're using is AMLiveNTV. We'll continue this conversation in a short while. Stay with us.
Dad, what made you decide to become a doctor?
It's because my father needed one. And you, what do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be happy like you.
Life insured is love assured.
New Sensodyne Repair and Protect with Deep Repair. It's a huge game changer for me. The science is pretty amazing because it really goes deep inside the tooth and repairs tooth sensitivity. I am a happy patient. I will be able to go back to the things that I enjoy eating the most. The science is there. It's going to improve the quality of my life in a big way. The new Sensodyne Repair and Protect with Deep Repair.
Good morning, rise and shine. Thank you for being with us dark and early on the morning fix. My name is David Ayuke.
And I'm Mariam Bishar. This is where good music lives, and guaranteed your weekday mornings are never going to be the same again.
Wake up to the sound of David and Mariam on Nation FM.
Every single day, every single day.
They're your morning hosts with the most, bringing you the energy you need to start your day. Nation FM, where good music lives.
Let me see y'all.
Dance.
She has to come clean tonight. Not just to the Dobrovolskis, but to Mom too. When's your due date?
Right, spill it. When is our baby due? Should I give you a ride home?
No, I'll take a cab. Your wife is waiting for you. Have a good night. Bye-bye. I don't know about you, but I notice Yana is modest. I think she's the Anna in your stories. Calm down. God forbid something happens to the baby. Like, for instance, someone finds out it doesn't exist.
Head over heels.
2 out of 3 Kenyan parents felt that they don't spend enough quality time with their kids. You can help change this by giving a generous voice to Storytime. Visit our library of homegrown audio stories at cadbury.africa and make Storytime sweeter.
No bunga pagi pendene lace the mystery. No bunga to browse on flick the mystery. No bunga me gonna next week the mystery.
Only on the trend. 10 p.m.
The Trend in association Techno Come on 20 series.
All right, welcome back to the program. You are watching AM Live as we converse around the issue of transparency and accountability in our public institutions, and of course also the issue of graft in the country. But Wangari, going back to a conversation that we continue having in the country is the issue of debt accumulation. We have the fiscal deficit. Just talk to us about how then mismanagement of public funds can lead us to, you know, this issue of huge debts, because it's not just, you know, the debt issue is not just about the issue of borrowing. You have corruption, which is also part of why we are where we are when we're talking about the bad fiscal state that we're in as a country.
Well, I think, yeah, you know, earlier I said that sometimes it can be very hard to quantify corruption because of its hidden nature, right? But some of the big scandals that we see are kind of a hallmark or a signal to say, you know, this is a level of corruption that is happening in the country. So if you saw, for example, the big cases, the Kimwarere Dam and all of those big cases, those are the ones that were caught. What about the multitude that weren't, right? So you start to get a sense of what is the magnitude of corruption and how it affects our economy. So what happens essentially, and how that plays into debt and fiscal space, is that, you know, if you're budgeting, so if I can go back to basics and say, what is public finance management? So public finance management is essentially the management of the budget cycle. So budget formulation, budget execution, and budget evaluation. And that all comes to the main objective of aggregate fiscal discipline, which deals with allocative efficiency and operational efficiency. Allocative efficiency essentially means assigning the right expenditures according to plan, the right revenues, right? And then operational efficiency is about value for money. So when you take that together and you say, okay, if we have a good public financial management system, we're able to plan efficiently, we're able to deploy those finances efficiently, and we're supposed to be getting our value for money. But if you have a situation where you have poor financial management, what happens is that the funds are not used optimally, and the funds may not be assigned to the priorities, the right priorities. And then corruption and mismanagement of funds plays in when, for example, if you decide to prioritize a certain project over the other, and this can happen when people undertaking corruption think that probably large projects it's easier to hide money in larger projects than to put money, for example, in teacher salaries or things like that, right? And so people make decisions based on how best they're going to be able to extract rent from these, or have rent-seeking behavior in some of these projects. So you look at a budget and you find that it's not optimized, it's not well prioritized because of people who may be creating the budgets. And I'm not painting everybody with the same brush, but I think it happens pretty frequently that the projects and activities within the budget are not the optimal budgets. So then how does that play into debt? Is that you start engaging in projects, maybe the projects even are low quality, because even in those projects the rent is being extracted and possibly the highest value for money is not being achieved. So you're getting low quality infrastructure, you're getting projects that are not priority, but the needs of the people are still there, and there's a mismatch. So you'll put this money in big projects, but there's still a gap that is what is needed by the populace. So what happens in subsequent years, you still have to budget for these projects because they're still a priority. So you have a lot of wastage of money, you still have a need, and you don't have money. So what do? You start to borrow. Right? You need to borrow finances because you still have gaps within the plans and priorities that you've not engaged in, and so now you start to look for money. And in a country like ours, Kenya is now a low middle income country. We are not eligible for the concessional debt from the World Bank and the big financial institution IMF as we were before. So now we're going out to get commercial loans, which are much more expensive. Now in an economy like ours, and this is something that we've been talking about over the last couple of months, look at what the dollar has done and look at what the other currencies have done. So if we get into public debt, for example, if we borrowed $100 million, now we have to, or we say we borrowed $1 billion, we have to then repay. We used to have to repay 100 million shillings back because exchange rate was about 100 shillings to the dollar. But now the currency has increased, and you know these commercial bonds, commercial loans are in dollarized, most of them, and so now we have to pay now 140, right? It's, I think the shilling to the dollar is about 140, yes. Right? So now we have to pay 140. We have to pay that back.
That's huge.
So that's a really big risk. So corruption really plays in when you have misappropriation, misallocation of financing, and low value for money, which means we still have to keep reinvesting and looking for money to reinvest because we invested in the wrong place because of rent-seeking behavior.
All right. And with that, I mean, let me get to you, Diana, and then I'll get your views, Faith, on this, because I know we actually had a report on the same. It's the issue of that particular proposed bill that is now in the National Assembly. It's been fronted by the Mbeere North Member of Parliament, Geoffrey Ruto. He seeks to amend sections of that law, of the anti-corruption law. He says it's going to help the EACC. You'll tell us if it really is going to be helping the EACC. But this is already facing a stiff, scrutiny from the civil society like TISA. I mean, Diana, where do you stand on this particular matter on the amendment to some sections of the anti-corruption bill, which specifically touches on the issue of procurement, which I think EACC said majority of corruption related scandals are related to procurement issues. So then you have this particular bill that seeks to change some of those laws. I don't know, what do you make of it?
Wow, I think, and it's very, very linked to what Faith indicated around what we have as the interpretation or the law for interpretation or for implementation of the leadership and integrity chapter.
Right.
It went to Parliament, it came back very, very weak. Now we have the Economic and Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act.
Okay.
That was passed even before the Constitution 20 years ago, at a time when there were leaders who saw and were pained enough by corruption. The hole that had been created and the wound that had been created by the 24 reign of power. And these things are very linked, because if you lack integrity and surround yourself with people who lack integrity, the only way to control the people is to use excessive power. So that is what we were allowing back. The amendments that are being proposed by the Honorable Member of Parliament go to the heart of this particular law on anti-corruption and economic crimes, because is it section 45? Yes. It seeks to amend what is defined as an economic crime. An economic crime is the fact that you sit down and plan in this 2023 budget, as Kenyans are made to pay more, I will ensure that this particular line is inflated by a margin of 60%. That way, I'll be able to make some money for myself and my cronies. The budget is passed. Then you influence the procurement process, the contracting process. Then you get your kickbacks. This is very, very, it is more calculated planning than murder. Because sometimes they plan 4 years in advance. The research that has gone into scandals like the Goldenberg, the Anglo leasing, show the amount of effort that goes into planning for corruption and procurement. Now, you want to say that, look, we can only deal with this in a civil way. It is already there in the public procurement.
Because he says what there could just be merely administrative errors which can be addressed.
But the act is very clear. It is not administrative errors. And we can cite the specific act. So with this, please know that EACC, PPRA, even DCI, their work on corruption will be slashed significantly in this country. How is it that the biggest problem we have with our anti-corruption war is to rescue, even if he was right, people who make administrative errors? Is that the biggest scourge we have on corruption? This is just somebody who wants to normalize corruption and ensure that people with access to public contracts can plan better and plunder better and safely can plunder safely without repercussion.
Which means they would be protected by the law.
By the law. So who are these we are electing into power to protect more thieves to come and steal from our public procurement process at a time when our national budget can barely be reduced because we must pay for half of our budget is paying debt. Okay, debt that was acquired for procured corruption. And now we want to let those people free. Part of how we will recover as a country and ultimately regain our freedom. For now, we are slaves. If we are in debt, you're slaves. We are subject to conditions of multilateral agencies, government that give us loans. We are subject to their conditions. Even as a country now, our president cannot plan freely because you must pay a debt. Okay? And it is actually said, you're better off sleeping hungry than incurring more debt. But for us, we are not ready to sleep hungry. We are okay to continue living in opulence and plundering more. So this is a law that just requires a lot of pushback. I was lucky to sit with a member of parliament, and I just felt there was a contradiction between the bill. I don't know whether he was misled to think he was doing something ingenious for this country, but when later he said he aspires to ensure that EACC ODPP is able to secure more conviction, I think we can assess this particular Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act and give him the amendments to strengthen. Okay. Not to weaken it. But if it goes as it is, surely this is an area even members of parliament must push back. We cannot bequeath a country of that just allows people to continue stealing from public coffers in this manner. Yeah.
And Faith, you know, EACC has already sort of made its stance on this particular matter. But don't you find the legitimacy perhaps of his argument, the member of parliament?
You know, there's a popular folklore African that when a hyena wants to eat its children, it starts saying they smell like goats. You know, the issue, the whole mischief behind the proposed amendment is that it seeks to exonerate any person that is accounting officers within public institutions from responsibility on how they administer and manage public funds. Government is big business. Government does not provide itself with services, neither does it provide itself with goods or works or anything. It actually procures for development, for just usual expenditure, including tea, pens, construction of roads. Government does not manufacture, so it actually gets money from. It gets money to be able to pay the service providers and those who do the works. So there's a lot of money when it comes to procurement, basically our taxes. So when a proposal comes in to exonerate people or officers who are supposed to be responsible in prudent management of public resources, then there's a very, very big mischief. Kenyans should not be led or misled to believe that this proposed amendment is coming to assist the war against graft. It is actually intended to pluck the teeth out of the institutions that have been put up to fight graft, so that institutions like EACC, ODPP, DCI, and others, ARA, and others, do not have the capacity to enforce the law. For instance, why do people engage in corruption? If we may ask ourselves, why would I want to flout procurement laws and maybe give a tender to person or a company that is not qualified, maybe does not even pay taxes, is not compliant, or does not meet the mandatory requirements in that tender process? Why? Is it out of my generosity? It's just my goodwill? Why? Because there is a benefit to me as a public officer, or as a procurement officer, as a finance officer, and maybe that benefit goes all the way up within the institution. A law is enacted to cure a mischief. And this law, that is section 45, 2B and C of the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act, was enacted in 2003.
All right.
And if you recall correctly, 2003 is when the United Nations Convention Against Corruption was also came into being, and Kenya ratified. Now Kenya ratified and also put its own national legislation to give effect to the convention, because it's an obligation for reasons that graft must be fought not only locally but internationally. So this act, much as it came before the Constitution, it came following an international instrument, not local instrument. And the Constitution actually came to even enforce it by having Article 10 on transparency and accountability, by having Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity, and also Article 232 on values and principles of public service, which includes, and is a thread that runs across all the articles within the Constitution, includes prudent management of public resources, because resources are limited wherever you go. Now, if we do not prudently use those resources to achieve our objectives, just as Wangari was saying, that is where we continue accumulating debts, which we cannot pay, but the money went elsewhere, was diverted somewhere else, and we didn't get, Kenyans didn't get value for money. So as EACC, we are totally opposed to the proposed bill, and we urge Kenyans, maybe through the media, the various local stations, to speak about it. The way we have talked about the housing levy, and it's been reduced. Let's talk about this proposed amendment and see it for what it is. It is actually supposed to tie the hands of the institutions charged with fighting graft, and it is also intended to protect those who benefit, those who engage in corruption for purposes of benefiting from my taxes and your taxes as Wanjiko.
Right. And Wangari, probably you'd like to add on to that. You know, it's interesting because I've read many articles that say the most lucrative business at this point is government procurement contracts. I mean, it's once you get a government tender, I think you're set, you're good to go, and you know, then you have this particular, you know, proposed bill that would you know, take back from anyone being held accountable in case there's any manipulation of procurement, sort of, to say. What would that mean for us as a country? I would like to get your thoughts on that.
It's actually this is such a timely time to be talking about this, because also, you know, we've been talking about the finance bill. So I wanted to mention three things. I think the first one relates to what you said, right? A lot of people say, you know, that the most lucrative deals with government contracts, they have very high figures. But the challenge with this is that, number one, they're only lucrative for some. Sometimes, because as you know, there are challenges with the payment system. Pending bills are sky high, right? So people have invested, and it's quite sad. People, for example, got a tender to build a road. They got the tender, they built the road, they borrowed to get machinery and things like that. This is just an example. And then the government hasn't paid them, either at the national or the county level, right? So and then they go bankrupt, they get auctioned, and yet they have this money that's being tied up in government. They're a pending bill. So then it's both sides, right? Who wants to work with government if you're going to be bankrupted on a promise of a payment that is somewhere in the future, right? So they look lucrative on paper, but I think it's only a few that are able to unlock that value, because most of the people are suffering from pending bills. The second one is really about the finance bill. When you talk about the finance bill, you're saying, you know, we're trying to raise all this money, but, you know, because we talked about the culture and we talked about what we see in the paper every day in terms of graft. As a taxpayer, I have very little incentive to pay my taxes because I see my taxes are going to into people's pockets, right? So I feel like
it's demoralizing.
You know, yeah, to use the analogy that Faith gave, you know, about it's almost like feeding the hyena, right? So why it's a big disincentive for us to pay this money even to this housing levy, because everybody's saying now this housing levy, what's going to happen? Will that money be realized? Say, you know, if you put money into the housing levy and then you don't get a house, you get a refund. Are we really believing that? Because, you know, the history of government giving refunds has been checkered. So I think that's also another challenge. And the last thing I wanted to say is, you know, in talking again about the culture, is that, you know, we saw when you're going through the newspaper review, we talked about talc, Johnson & Johnson, there's a case around that. Right. Our taxes are supposed to be going into regulatory bodies that tell us, you know, we should not be using these products that are harmful for us. And that is money that was probably squirreled away into someone's account, right? So we feel the direct effects of that. I mean, everybody knows, at least maybe people I know, people have been talking about this Johnson & Johnson product for a long time.
The longest time.
The longest time. Why is it happening now, right? So we ask ourselves, why isn't the regulatory body doing what it's supposed to do? And part of the reason is because the corruption culture means that the finances or the budget that perhaps goes to regulation of, for example, KEBS and other regulatory bodies may not be sufficient or strong enough, or perhaps speaks to a corruption problem within that sector. And even when you talk about, we're looking about the media personality's daughter who was abducted. That taxi service or that whatever service is been known. We've been seeing a lot of things in the press about this taxi service being problematic, that thugs were driving this taxi service. Who's regulating this? Is it, I think it's NTSA or somebody that regulates these kind of ride-sharing apps, ride-sharing services. So if we're diverted money in corruption, affects us directly because we don't have regulation in place to regulate these industries, and we have people being abducted. So really, at the end of the day, we look at these big cases and we say, you know, it's such a shame, but at the back end, it's whipping us, right? It's like when you think about a hurricane, it's rough here, then it's calm, and then it hits you from behind, right? And that is exactly what corruption does to us.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so we're almost out of time. We still have a lot of it could have gotten through, but because it is, you know, budget week, we expect that the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Professor Njuguna Ndung'u will be tabling his budget estimates before Parliament on Thursday. Just quick remarks. I'll begin with you, Diana, on as a Kenyan, you know, just, you know, you're not even today the national coordinator, Tissa. As a Kenyan, are you hopeful we're going to have the maiden budget from the Kenya Kwanza administration? There are many things. Already you have the finance bill that has created quite a huge debate in the country. But from the budget, are you hopeful as a Kenyan? Looking at the state of the economy right now?
From the budget, am I hopeful? No, I think I am largely anxious. The only hope I have is that the members of parliament will have an awakening and will do the right thing.
Do you have trust in our National Assembly, especially also as they debate the finance bill? Also, is this going to be?
I have partial trust, but I have trust in the Kenyan people and what they will do for the next 3 days to ensure that this awakening of members of parliament happens. As we go to the reading of the budget, one, I note that the overall budget we've seen cuts in the health industry. That's a bit worrisome. I'm very encouraged by the proposals to hire more teachers and more resourcing to basic education, because this particular year, from students who are in CBC to our public secondary school, things are almost grinding to a halt. The capitation that ought to go to schools, by now they should have received 80% of their capitation. They only have 30%. So that I hope the budget will resolve. But looking at the previous budget, there isn't much hope if we do not address the expenditure and the resource mobilization hand in hand and proper prioritization. I had hoped that the first Kenya Kwanza government would signal a shift in priorities, that this will be a different government that is very, very humanistic, that is people-centered, but I am not too sure that we will see that. We've highlighted the amendments to the Anti-Corruption and Economic Crimes Act, but there's another amendment that is going to the Public Finance Management Act, and this is around the debt ceiling. We are turning our debt ceiling from an absolute figure to linking it to a figure of the GDP, 55%. We've already surpassed that. But what we have done is we have said the cabinet secretary can exceed this and then come and explain the breach to Parliament. Again, a very bad step at a time when we should be very, very disciplined around our debt management if we are to give Kenyans the optimism that they will finally get the required services. This government is not speaking about debt default and so on. They are saying they will pay no matter what. As a result, public services and public goods, all these regulatory mechanisms are collapsing because they are not properly resourced. This particular budget, I had hoped that governance, justice, and law organizations would all have an increase. But looking at the budget allocation, I am sure our independent commissions are on their own. They will largely be able to pay salaries and a few other operations. So that remains worrisome. But I must laud some of the steps, particularly the effort at human resourcing. But the rest is still not very pleasant.
But at least there's some hope. There's some hope.
There's yes, it is not all gloom. And even in the finance bill, there are a few things that are commendable, but the bulk of the things will oppress Kenyans.
Let me hear from Faith. Your expectation, at least as a Kenyan, and of course I know I've not checked the estimates, at least what the allocation for EACC is, but are you hopeful? Do you feel like you have the political goodwill to do your job?
Let me first talk as a Kenyan, addressing other Kenyans.
But also very quickly.
As Kenyans, we cannot afford to lose hope, not at this point. Kenyans have proved to be quite resilient when it comes to dealing with the challenges that face us, including the recent one, which is the COVID-19. And if you look at the finance bill, what matters, even that 1 shilling that is going to the public, how will it be used? How will it be managed? If it is managed well, it can do a lot, isn't it? Doesn't matter how much we get, but how it is managed. So I'm hopeful that those areas of the finance bill or the budget that touch on Wanjiku are more emphasis is put on delivering the services, health, education, and security. But I wish we had focused more on building maybe cottage industries, manufacturing, because that is where creation of jobs happens, and that is why we can get more taxes. And on the issues of whether we have political goodwill, I think we do. Based on the recent pronouncements by the president on that he will hold accountable all the CSs and the PSs for any graft that happens in their dockets. It gives us more impetus in doing our work, because we know that we have the backing of the presidency in doing our work. And we are also hopeful that we have a budget. I'm not clear how much it is, but we usually get also supplementary budget towards in the middle of the financial year, and we hope, if whatever we've been allocated, taking into consideration the economic status that our country is in, we'll also, once things are improve, we'll also be able to get a little more so that we can effectively and efficiently carry out the mandate bestowed upon us by the Wanjiku and the Kenyan citizens through the law.
All right. Yes. Thanks, Faith. And finally, Wangari, I know, by the way, this evening you will be with my calling in our, a business editor, Julian Samboko, just trying to unpack the budget ahead of the budget reading. But just maybe your very quick thoughts on what your expectations are.
Well, I think, you know, we've already seen that this administration is austere, has a very tough hand, right? For better or for worse, right? Because I think there's some things that have put us in challenges and some things that are being done by current administration that are trying to unravel the challenges that we had before. So I think we are going to be up for austere times, and I think coupled with that is, you know, we are in a very tough economy, just locally and internationally. So, and then the finance bill and the taxes that are coming out there, I think, are also going to make things a little bit difficult. And then I think Diana also mentioned about the, you know, default rate. So all these things that are happening. So I think the three things that I would say, and I completely agree with Faith, is that we do have a lot of resilience as a country, and I think we need to really start to think about strategies to help ourselves, even as we feel like maybe the government may not be as supportive. I think the first one is really buckle down our own personal finances, right? Making sure that we are prioritizing what we need to prioritize, restructuring and reviewing our finances so that we can effectively survive, essentially this time. Number two is also to participate, because not only is the national budget coming out, also the county budgets are coming out. So we need to make sure we're participating and giving our voice. I think the finance bill participation in the budget preparation has been quite lively, quite engaging, and I think this is very promising. And if we continue to do this, then we'll be able to get some reprieve, because at the end of the day, you know, we're the ones being affected. And I think the third one I would say is the government needs to really think about how we can cushion, especially the most vulnerable. What are the safety nets in place? Because already, you know, with the recession and with the current legislative proposals in the finance bill and the budget, things are going to be very tough, and more people are going to fall below the poverty line. So we need to think about social safety nets and how we're going to protect these groups of people so that we can carry on to more prosperous times.
All right. Thank you so much. Wangari Mwike, Public Finance Specialist, EGCL Institute. Faith Ngade from the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, who's the Assistant Director, Asset Recovery. Thank you so much. As well as Diana Gishengo, National Coordinator at TISA, the Institute for Social Accountability. Thank you so much, ladies, for coming in this morning to have this conversation. Hopefully, we'll continue to, you know, keep our leaders in check and trying to just put them to account, and of course also just trying to look at transparency within our public institutions. Well, that's all we had lined up for you this hour. Many thanks for watching. Your World is coming up shortly with Winnie Lubembe. You don't want to miss that. My name is Zedab Ismail, and have yourself a good morning. Good day.